I'm worried about Fábio Vieira. Like, not his safety, I'm not his mum. But I am worried about his future at Arsenal. But before we worry about the future, let's go back. June 16th, 2022. I was sat in a Joe and the Juice in Hammersmith, and some dude named Pedro Sepulveda broke the Vieira news, which was quickly picked up by the big hitters. I, personally, had never heard of him, but I logged onto Twitter, discovered everyone was a secret Portuguese football expert, and set about the usual process when we hear links. YouTube, FBref, Scout, SofaScore, repeat. To put into perspective just how out of the blue this was, by June the 15th, there was a grand total of 5 tweets so far that month containing the words Fábio, Vieira and Arsenal in them at the same time. By June 21st, he was an Arsenal player, and we know how long they take to confirm these things. There's a few reasons I mention that, and one of them is because right at the top of this, I want to reveal my biases. Firstly, the shock nature of the deal might have elevated my expectations somewhat. You get visions of Wenger strolling out with Sol Campbell to an empty press room, but this time it's Arteta's turn, with a Portuguese international who took the world by storm in the 2021 Under-21 Euros. Because most transfers play out like an open wound, this one felt special, out of the ordinary, and I suppose I may have transposed that special feeling onto my expectations of the player, possibly wrongly. And secondly, I mention it because I look back on that day, frantically Googling in Joe and the Juice, and I think I still don't really know this player. There's certain players who jump off the pitch and the screen at you. Your Salibas and your Sakas, of course, but it's not even necessarily the most elite talents. Reece Nelson's quick feet really excite me. Back in the day, I loved Oxlade-Chamberlain, and I will talk your ear off about how Koscielny and Mertesacker is the most underrated centre-back pairing in Premier League history. Some players just suit your eye. But there's something about Vieira that just doesn't land with me. I see he's inventive, I see the technical level, but I don't know what he's elite at. What makes him stand out from other, clearly gifted, 8, 10, final third creative technician types? What makes him significantly, i.e. millions of pounds worth, better than, say, a Ben Cottrell in the academy? I said on a podcast once, I feel like I could close my eyes and point to a random player in the Sporting, Benfica or Porto academy, and he'd probably give you a decent proportion of what Vieira does for a fraction of the price. That's probably, and almost definitely, harsh. But I suppose my point is, I find myself longing for him to influence games, longing for him to show a bit of quality, a bit of fight. But then I chastise myself and think, come on, it's not Passion FC. Look deeper, what are you missing? Maybe I am missing something, and please let me know in the comments. I certainly hope I am, but I can only say what I see and be honest with you guys, and I just don't see it. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you my 3-point personal checklist for the things I need to see from Fábio Vieira before I personally stop investing in him. Because I think there's a long way to go before we should write him off. He's only been here a year for starters, and I'm sure Mikel will in no way have given up. The first protestation I'm sure you've all heard to Vieira, usually from English fans, I find, is around his perceived lack of size and muscle. Now, if that's your entire diagnosis of why it hasn't quite worked out for him yet, I do think it's slightly lazy analysis, but I don't rule it out as part of the picture. Any discussion around Vieira's physicality shouldn't veer into personal and unkind critique of him or his body, but I think as fans of a club, we are within our rights to question whether a player is fit for purpose. That goes for anything, be they too muscular, tall, large, small, or anything else for the job at hand. We're talking about athletes carrying out actions at the end of the day, and biology helps and hinders. You don't ask Peter Crouch to be a touchline winger. The key term here is fit for purpose. Is Vieira fit for purpose? There's plenty of footballers with a similar frame to Vieira, including his fellow countryman Bernardo Silva, who we'll come to, Luka Modric in his early years, and Angel Di Maria, two of the greatest footballers of the last decade, had and have similar frames to Vieira. You can be an unbelievable footballer who just has a small frame. So I don't think it's fair to say he just needs to bulk up. I think it's more complex than that. For me, it's more about core strength than size or shape. I worry about him from that perspective. It feels too easy to knock him off the ball, and as brilliant a technician as he clearly is, he's not Messi where he's so good technically it sort of doesn't matter how big he is. But also, Messi's centre of gravity is so low and he's so grounded, he could be skinnier and 2 inches shorter and it wouldn't matter. Vieira to me feels too upright, operating from the chest and shoulders rather than at his core at the moment. He's top heavy. I suppose a simple way of putting it might be just to say watch Messi dribble, then watch Vieira dribble, and then pinpoint where you think the centre of each player's shape is. When you don't have a size or strength advantage over your opponent, you have to learn to shield the ball. And for me, he needs to learn how to roll contact and protect the ball better. That's really the crux of this. But I can't help feeling if Vieira did put on a bit of muscle, it might help. But I am not a strength and conditioning expert by any means. However, I was lucky enough to connect up with a strength and conditioning coach at a top Premier League club who also watches these videos. Hello. They preferred not to be named, but I put my questions to them about Fábio Vieira and strength and conditioning more broadly, and it's a great insight into how this actually works at the top level. Check it out on Patreon and YouTube memberships for just £3 a month to support me, support the channel, and get access to all the previous bonus content, all for just £3 a month. I found out that Daniel Ek, the Spotify CEO, is a different knock fan this week, by the way, so hi Daniel, if you're watching. Physicality aside, there's a player there. I know there is. You don't get bought by Arsenal for €35 million for nothing. I'm not saying he's bad, by any means. I also think Vieira hasn't been helped by his role in the Arsenal team. Let's use Bernardo Silva as a comparison. You're not going to find two players who are the exact same, but they're the same build, both Portuguese, not sure that matters, same league, 1 inch apart in height, and their skill sets aren't a million miles from each other. So I think it's fair to look at why one is working so well, while another isn't. Stylistically, I'd argue Bernardo is more dribble first, where Fabio is more pass first, and in terms of their dual numbers, Bernardo is marginally better than him on the ground, but Vieira is a lot better than him in the air, so it kind of evens out. The key difference is in terms of their roles. Bernardo Silva is usually asked to hold width for Man City, where a lot of Vieira's contributions this season have come inside. Out wide, Bernardo can make use of his burst and his eye for a final pass in a bit more space, without getting physically dominated. He's a reliable outlet and ball progressor, and is so good technically you trust him to keep the ball high and wide and recycle possession, even if he's not being incisive. Vieira, I believe, could do that too, and could be very effective. But up to now, he's been used mainly centrally, where the spaces are condensed and he has to speed up his actions a bit more. It's in here that I wonder whether his lack of core strength really shows him up, inside, around players. Arsenal's system functioned best last season with Xhaka in the left 8. Wide rotations, arriving late, second balls, middle 2 in the block. I'm not sure that's Vieira's game, and even if his instructions were slightly different than Xhaka, the system was set up for that, so it's hard to drop him in and expect everything to change. Maybe with an evolution of that role next season seemingly on its way, we might see Vieira flourish as a Havertz or Ødegaard rotation option, and I'm open to it. On that, I also wonder whether Vieira's role has been slightly blurred by Ødegaard. A lot of times this season, when Vieira has started in significant games, Ødegaard has too. One of the few times that Fabio was without Ødegaard in the right 8 was that Brentford game away, probably Vieira's best and most memorable of the season. I wonder if we'd seen Vieira in that more creative hub role more, afforded a bit more space, allowed to drop and receive to feet, work the edge of the box, etc., we might have seen something more. Could we use Vieira in that kind of Bernardo Silva-y holding width type role next season? Possibly. But that would be on the right, in place of Saka, and not only is he not getting in the team over B, the way Mikel asks his wingers to play, coming into lane 4, 1v1s, riding challenges, attracting play, the dynamism, I just can't see it long term. But in certain games, it could be an option. Next, let's talk numbers. FBref.com have a feature where you can compare the 5 most stylistically similar players, numbers-wise, around Europe to any player. For Fabio, those are Zielinski, Gross, Alex Bainer, Kevin De Bruyne, and Ødegaard. It's a concern I have. He's too similar to Ødegaard. League starts-wise last season, Vieira is miles behind on 3 compared to the likes of Kevin De Bruyne and Zielinski on 37, and I don't think that should be discounted when you consider the rest of the stats, which are all per 90. That said, Fabio is second bottom for goals per 90, but second top behind just KDB for assists per 90. He has the second lowest XG per 90 on 0.14, the lowest progressive carries per 90, the second lowest progressive passes, but is second behind KDB again for progressive passes received. There's encouraging signs and clear strengths, albeit moulded by role and instruction. But overall, it's evidently a player who on the main metrics hasn't quite found his feet. Another possibility is that Arsenal was so good last season that I'm underrating him. It's hard to get on a train that's moving this fast, granted, and the midfield was one of our strongest components last season. There are some fans, even friends of mine, who love him. George on the Different Knock and Arsenal podcast talks about his lack of angle bias, his ball over the top, his ability in the half spaces to pick out a cross, and eulogises about him. He says the explosion is coming. I'm particularly keen to see Vieira play with a proper number 9, or a target man. I think we might see his numbers go way up if we get, say, an Osimhen. But at some point, you do just have to make it work, no matter your environment. There is so much to be encouraged about with Vieira. The season before last, he was up there with Trent in terms of progressive passes and expected assists for under 23s. That same season, only Lionel Messi played more through balls per 90 in the top 6 leagues. At the under 21 Euros in 2021, Vieira was named player of the tournament. I'm not saying he's not a good player, far from it. A huge proportion of this is just environment. But Vieira wasn't cheap. Up until this summer, he was our 13th most expensive player ever. And when you consider the type of overpay we did for Pepe, Mustafi and the like who are above him, it tells you how much we wanted him when we were willing to part with that kind of money. A player doesn't choose his price, but I want to see some return on that investment sooner rather than later. Okay, I promised you a 3-point checklist before I sell my Fábio Vieira stocks. So, here it is. Number 1, I want to see him get over 2,000 minutes and a run of games. Fábio Vieira lovers will tell you, quite rightly, he hasn't had enough minutes, and I completely agree with them. He had 499 league minutes this season for us, and it's a pattern over his career. Vieira made his senior debut for Porto in 2019, playing 2,857 minutes for them all in. At Arsenal, he's played 1,413 minutes all in over the last season. That's just 4,270 minutes altogether at 23 years of age. Bukayo's played 13,535 senior minutes all in, and is 2 years his junior, nearly triple. Rodri is one of 26 players in the Premier League who played more minutes last season for their club and internationally than Vieira has in his entire professional career. So, look, he's barely had a sniff. If I was him, I'd be pushing for a loan move in January if I'm not getting the minutes by then. I also want to see him given a run of games in his favoured position, which I believe is in the right half space or the right 8, wherever that's going to be next season. It's hard to build up intensity and rhythm if you're in and out of the team all the time, but he has to earn that right. Number 2, I want to see him after a proper pre-season. Vieira was pictured in a protective boot in early July last year and missed the entirety of pre-season, having picked up an issue with the national team. His debut for Arsenal came on the 4th of September in the loss at Old Trafford. Hardly an ideal time, and even now, Vieira was forced to miss the Under-21 Euros this summer due to injury. Hopefully the injury record is nothing to worry about, but regardless, you get out over the season what you build up in pre-season. It's very hard to catch up once you're behind, especially when you're in and out of the side. With a proper pre-season, we might see Vieira at the level to compete more intensely, and I think obviously he deserves that chance. Number 3, and finally, I want to see him without Ødegaard in the team. I want to see Vieira given a chance as our central creative and passing hub. I think, as mentioned, Ødegaard is slightly treading on his toes, but with Havertz and Rice joining the midfield, I think we'll see changes regardless, some of which may actually suit Vieira. With Champions League football, the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup, he should have ample chance. There you go. I really, really hope I'm wrong about Vieira. I really hope I come back to this video in 6 months and think, what an idiot. And not just because of my hair. No one will be happier than me to be wrong, including you writing that Schadenfreude comment in 6 months. Yes, I see you. Vieira has a lot to prove, and I'm not convinced yet. Only time will tell if he can turn it around. Hopefully, for his sake and for ours, he can be fabulous next season. I'll leave. Sorry.